Welcome. It's February 13th. Isn't that wild? It's I don't know why I'm so surprised. February does come after January. And I'm Leo Sarkissian, for those that don't know, but I see a lot of regulars on this call, and people are continuing to come in, but we'll start in a few minutes. I want to wait a few minutes before I introduce Barbara L'Italian. I'm so pleased to have her with us today. And I see a lot of familiar faces as well. So, starting with this, webinar session, we're probably going to keep it to one webinar a month. We're going to do it on special topics like today. Next month, we'll have Bob Putnam with us to talk about positive behavioral supports. And so looking forward to that session as well. And with that, that's Julie O'Brien coming in too. Barbara, someone we know from way back. So actually, a lot of the people here we know from way back. So what a pleasure to have them. So I'm going to, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you. And, basically, not that you really need an introduction, but first place, it's a pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of the Disability Law Center, Barbara L'Italian. Many of you know, Barbara actually worked with me, and before doing that, she was a state senator and state representative. She advanced many key disability priorities during that time, including the autism omnibus bill. She actually, that 2014, we got 3 bills. Barbara will call it 4 if you include the money bill, right?
The IT bond bill.
Yeah, IT bond bill. But the reality was Real Lives, autism omnibus, and the national background check all passed. And, she was nudging people, and I think some of it passed at 2 a.m. technically, but, it was 12 midnight as far as we all were concerned. But among other things, she's focused on the needs of seniors, people who are economically disadvantaged, the LGBTQ community. In fact, that was a big deal in her district, as I recall, in a race where she didn't back down. She was chair of the first Autism Commission. She chaired the Elder Affairs Committee. She was vice chair of Ways and Means in the House. I don't have to read that. In fact, that didn't even make it in your description, that was a role. And she's always believed in community-based services and consumer protection, Alzheimer's care. And I could go on. We're not going to, equal marriage, of course, universal health care. So it's really a pleasure. She worked at the Massachusetts State's Treasurer Office too, in both roles, here and there, as Senior Director of Government Affairs. So it's really a pleasure to have you with us, Barbara. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm happy to be here. I see an awful lot of familiar faces that, none of this work gets done by one person. It's really a collaborative event. And many of you had a hand to play in all of these different pieces that Leo just mentioned. And so I'm very, very happy to be here.
And what I thought, Barbara, is, it's been a while. Hillary did something about a year ago in Disability Law Center, but obviously didn't get into all the aspects of it. And it was during a time where there was, shifting times there. And maybe you could share a little bit about, not only, well, whatever you want to share, it's also what the Law Center is doing right now. And I know you're going to be doing some strategic planning as well for the future.
Sure. So I'll start here, which is that Disability Law Center, as many of you may know, is the protection and advocacy lead agency for Massachusetts. We're given federal powers to go in and investigate instances of abuse and neglect. And so we have pretty wide-ranging powers which enable us to go into places like Bridgewater State Hospital, to go into day programs, to go into residential settings, to go into nursing homes. So we are chiefly charged with looking at investigating instances of abuse and neglect for disabled people in the broadest sense of the word. So by that, I mean folks with physical disabilities, folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, folks with psychiatric disabilities as well. So we really run the gamut. The audience here is mostly involved in and interested in the IDD world, but we have a really broad mission. And so we work really closely with a number of I call them sister agencies, the ARC being chief among them, and Boston Center for Independent Living, and Easter Seals, and the Mass Developmental Disabilities Council, and others on the different aspects of what we do. And so we are a relatively small agency. I think we have about 28 employees, some of whom are part-time. So we obviously cannot service all individual cases. So what we do is we really structure based on focus areas, which are listed on our website. And we try to hew as closely as possible to those focus areas in terms of whether or not we might be able to service someone, again, subject to the, to our, current capacity needs. We serve folks with ADA complaints. We serve folks that are victims of crime. We go into people's homes that are representative payees on behalf of Social Security and do those checks to ensure that rep payees are, understand the process, know how to file their paperwork properly, and are doing so. Probably most pertinent to the ARC is a lot of the work we do on behalf of the IDD community, including at the moment, one of the most topical things we are most concerned about is the workforce issues that have been around for a very long time, but were certainly exacerbated by COVID. And so one of the things I'd like to point out, the work that we're doing in terms of the workforce includes right now, we have a DayHab survey up on our website. We've heard of a lot of cases of people who have ended up experiencing reduced DayHab hours, or perhaps have not been able to return at all because of the severity of their needs. And so we consider that to be a civil rights issue, and we are collecting information about that. So we do litigation as well. There are cases that we do. Most often they are of a systemic nature. If we are taking a case, for example, going to court on behalf of the citizens in the city of Boston to have remote access to accessible voting materials. And also with the Secretary of State's office, we worked that out as well. So most often it's of a systemic nature, but at times we also do some individual litigation as well, often around ADA compliance. I see on here one of our attorneys who has taken a number of cases on behalf of folks who needed modifications to their home. And it really, vastly improves their accessibility and their quality of life. So Riz Huda, who's on, has done a number of those cases on our behalf quite successfully. We do a lot of legislative advocacy, which is part of what attracted me to this job, because when I was in the House and in the Senate, and sandwiched in between was my time with Leo at the ARC, we were then collaborating with the Disability Law Center on employment issues around sheltered work, folks being paid, not being warehoused. DLC was very involved, Rick Glassman, in terms of doing the policy deep dive research and legal advocacy into the pieces behind the National Criminal Background Check and around self-determination. So we are playing a part at the table as part of the MA21 coalition, trying to really push and understand why 8 years after the Real Lives Bill was signed into place, there still are no regulations. I know you all are part of that as well. And DLC also played a part in Nikki's Law in helping to provide sort of the legal research and backstop policy-wise. Again, oftentimes through Rick Glassman or through Hillary Dunn Stannis, who are both lawyers. I am not a lawyer. I don't know if you all know that, but it seems to me that by working at DLC, I'm able to close a loop that DLC has. So they are, the lawyers know their legal stuff. They're really great at what they do. We have a very deep policy bench, steeped in research. Having been someone who's written laws, debated laws, amended laws, and seen the implementation of laws, in particular the autism mandated coverage after we got that passed. It's important to make sure that the good works of DLC and what they're seeing on the ground and what we're seeing in collaboration with coalitions, that if we do need to go into the legislature to create changes, fixes, funding, etc., that we do it. And so that piece, we as an organization at DLC had farmed out to a paid lobbyist for over 20 years. And now at the beginning of this year, I will be taking over that work on behalf of DLC because I have the relationships. I know how the building works. So we'll be trying to kind of strengthen up that connection, in terms of the work that we find on the ground bubbling up that may require, as I said, either legislative fixes or new legislation or funding. So that's sort of what we do in a nutshell. Oftentimes one of the biggest challenges for us is capacity driven. And as far as our intake process, it goes through an online intake. People do an online and then they are called back. There are certain categories that we just do not get involved in. We do not do family law, so we refer out to other partners in the legal world. In the past, we've done a lot of special education work, and I know that from when I worked at the ARC and as a legislator. Right now, what we are limiting our education work to really is restraint and seclusion. We have a lawyer named Stephanie who is doing work on that and actually working and conversing with DESE at some of the highest levels around providing a credentialing system for trainers around alternative uses to restraint and seclusion. And so with the thought being that in order to make change, there needs to be available trainers able to go out and train educators on what the other options are. And that really pertains both to in-district and out-of-district schools. So we do very little education work. We do not do family law. But I would encourage anyone who has any sort of issue to reach out to our intake department, because we, even if we're unable to handle the case, we can always find, a relevant sister agency who might be able to help.
What I was thinking that might not happen as often, probably Mass Office on Disability sometimes. Though
We do work with
right?
MOD, Boston Aid to the Blind, National Federation of the Blind.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, we work with all of those groups. Yes.
Because that would be a good way to hand off, like, especially if you're getting bombarded, right, with individual calls.
Mhm.
And I think we have the same problem here, right? The individual piece is working on a systemic, but you need the individual data, right, to make the
Right.
systemic argument. That's the irony of it. And
Mhm.
what I one of the missing pieces sometimes, Barbara, is on seclusion. We'll start with that, but I'm dying to talk to you about rehabilitation today too, while you're on.
Sure.
Right. So, and the seclusion, I think there's like a disconnect sometimes in what the larger public, even our public, not even the larger, our sort of environment hears about, our constituency, about some of the egregious things that happen. And I think there's more stories, even two or three stories, if we could probably not only have Stephanie do, but others that are involved in this fight, so people could get educated. Because oftentimes what I find is a backlash, as the other way, because if someone's suddenly nervous about things maybe they're doing the right way. That's why we're having this session on positive behavioral supports, is we want people to go in that direction as you do. And to take advantage of that. But I think when you mentioned research, I remember how much research was done on the Nikki's Law by the team there, and how valuable it was. Okay, so and sometimes you have even law students, right? That then work
We
on
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have law students and we have law fellows. A law fellow would be someone who's completed their their law school and come in and serve for a period of a year. And with regards to Nikki's Law, Rick is just masterful at continuing to follow the threads. So, as you know, passing something and then its implementation is really important. And recently in Mass Lawyers Weekly, he brought to all of our attention an article written about cases that have been brought to court and what that looks like and how the court seems to be interpreting Nikki's Law. So that's important too, because a lawsuit that can completely change the trajectory of something that you may have intended to serve. So
yeah, great point.
so he does all of that.
Yeah. And one thing, just for those of you that don't remember or may not have been around for that was developing a registry for people who had been substantiated for abuse that we did not have in Massachusetts. And it was it was more of a priority than what we did have, even existing, because there's unfortunately, so many occurrences now. And I do want to say DLC played a critical role in the negotiations with us. And if it wasn't, I think we would have had to find a DLC if it wasn't existing, bottom line.
And even that's the beauty of what, Rick and Hillary and others that have been doing this work for decades bring, right? Is the ability to do that quick and thorough legal research. And even we're able to compare with our fellow protection and advocacy organizations. There's one for each of the 50 states plus territories. And, they make good use of leveraging out and asking other states, have you encountered this? What have you done? Like learning from each other as well.
So one of the things we're hoping a bill will pass to expand it. I know there's things to resolve. Sometimes in implementation at DPPC, there's things that have to develop with new staff, right? And learning about our field. One of the issues actually we talked about that we never got a chance to revisit was Rick and Hillary had shared that the incidence of substantiation is a concern. In other words, the number of substantiated cases when he was in the midst of that research, and the four of us sat down, Maura, Hillary, Rick, and myself, and we said, at some point we should probably follow up and figure out why substantiation relative to other states, is not as high as it could be. And of course, who knows why it is, right? And so there's things even within that, right, that come up that, again, it's a manpower capacity issue to follow up, and then you hope it gets better, the implementation on, and actually that has nothing to do with Nikki's Law. That it just has to do with the follow-up on abuse and neglect,
Right.
And
so can I just say that we have a couple of advocates that go in on a weekly basis into different, sites scattered across the state that serve folks with intellectual and developmental disability. One of those persons came up with a tool where we are trying to concretely assess, and we're sharing it with DDS, and it's around how often folks are in the community, whether it's meaningful interaction in the community. So in other words, is it something that the person is interested in and wants to do versus being kind of brought along as a group to something? Once you get there in the community, are you interacting with members of the community, or are you just, sitting off in the corner with no interaction? So we're actually monitoring on an ongoing basis using this tool, meaningful levels of community interaction that's person focused. And we've been sharing, we had a meeting with the DDS General Counsel recently to share that tool. And because we really feel like that's one of the next steps is making sure that people are out in engaged in meaningful activities, meaningful to them, individualized.
That's
Sorry to
great.
interrupt. What kind of tool is this? It's like electronic tool. What kind of tool is it?
No, well, hi Jossie.
Hi,
It's It's a tool insofar as it's, you know, a series of questions that we're asking. And we're
Ah.
trying to figure out in a given month how many days the person's been out in the community, and then digging a little deeper into not just like, you know, they went out on a Dunkin' run, but did they interact with anyone? You know, did they go because they wanted something? Or was it, you know, more that a staffer wanted to go get coffee? Do you know what I mean? We're trying to dig a little deeper to get a sense of the meaningful nature of the activity. And so DDS is looking at this, and they have, you know, been very positive, understanding that, you know, that this is sort of a next level that we need to be looking at. And it was devised by a young woman on our staff who's just doing an unbelievable job.
Great, thank you. Thanks for telling us about that. Does anybody want to ask a question before I go down the rehabilitation route? Because I'm real, it just hit me that I'm monopolizing. Thank you.
I guess
Gianni.
I just want to say one thing. You had mentioned about referrals, and you mentioned like a sister agency. I know that actually I found that when I was trying to find a lawyer to help me with accommodations on my job, I called around, and you guys are one of the people, but I finally wound up with the Mental Health Legal Advising Committee.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they were very helpful.
Yes, we work with MLAC. We also work with Boston Center for Independent Living and all the independent living centers. You know, depending on what the nature of the need is, will determine who we refer people to. It really depends on what's needed. Yeah.
And, you know, it's great that you're able to connect with MLAC too. I think it's really hard, you know, when it comes to individual things just everywhere, you know, because of the capacity issue, right? And how many people approach a given organization. So, and Giassi, my hunch is because you're so well connected, you're good at, you know, finding those things. And
Oh, I'm getting good.
you're getting good. Okay.
I'm
All right,
learning. I'm learning as I go along.
I thought you were
Right.
already pretty darn good at it. Diane?
But the average person has no idea. They don't know where to start. And so it's really, that's why it's incumbent on us to help
Well,
give
that was
people
me. That was
information.
me when I was calling you guys, thinking, "Oh, Disability Law Center." Obviously, I didn't. But no, that was not the appropriate place. Eventually, I wound up with Mental Health Legal Advising Committee.
Yeah.
Because mine was a very individual case. There was no systemic, but I didn't understand all that. You know, I didn't.
Right. That's why when in doubt, give us a call rather
Yeah.
than, yeah.
Yeah. Diane, you have your hand up.
Boy, can I echo Giassi on that. Yeah, before, and we don't need to dwell on this at all. I just wanted to thank you, Barbara, as a member of the Guardianship Alternatives and Innovation Network, which was launched in part due to the research I did under the fellowship awarded by the DD network, including DLC. I really want to thank you for engaging in the Supported Decision-Making Coalition. Having somebody not only with the knowledge of the legislative process, but the support of you specifically in those meetings is just, I think, really elevates the effort and brings people together so that they can really keep moving forward. So I want to thank you for that. I also just want to mention that an offer. My research under that fellowship was started to sort of look at, you know, where can folks go who are having difficulties with their guardians. And we do start with Disability Law Center for that. And I know, and I've learned over time that you cannot take on individual cases, but I'd love to chat with you at some point as to where folks can be referred, because that really was part of the effort of the fellowship, and the group has evolved into looking at alternatives, which is the appropriate evolution for that. But I just put that out there that I'd love to connect with you at some point on that.
Sure. Yeah, I neglected to mention supported decision-making, but, you know, I joined in my current job the last day of May. So I was really far into that 2-year session. You know, most bills had already, you know, stopped by going to a study, right? In February or March of that year, we had a few things that were still hopeful. So jumped on a little late in the session. And of course, we had the partial victory of having the Senate report out the supported decision-making bill. The same with the wheelchair repair bill, which DLC is taking the lead on in early October, the day that the inclusive concurrent enrollment bill was signed by Governor Baker. But, you know, I think with the beginning of a new year, we need to want to get that bill passed. Well, it's got to get assigned. It's got to get in a committee. There's got to be chairs of said
There's gotta
committees
be
and
committees.
members and a hearing.
Right.
But the hope is that that could get fast tracked through the Senate using the language that had already passed them to get it over to the House so that there's more time to devote to getting this thing passed this session. You know, because really you're up against it when it's in October of a 2-year session, and there really aren't slated to be any more formal sessions, just informal. And truly last legislative session, they really did 1 or 2 policy pieces after that. Most of what they did in the last couple of weeks leading to the end of last session really were local bills. They just did not get involved in anything policy related. So, you know, it's a fresh start, but we already have our high watermark of having passed the Senate. And so we go from there. So the approach I try to take with all of this is I may not be the subject matter expert on any of it. Where I can be helpful in terms of how to, you know, deal with the inner workings of the legislature, the personalities, the committee members, the strategy of whether you're going top down in your approach, bottom up, or outside in, meaning the outside grassroots folks. I'm very good at, you know, but I will always acknowledge that others probably have a leg up on me in terms of the subject matter being experts, but I hope to be able to help as part of that coalition with partners like the ARC and MDDC. In terms of the guardianship piece, we just don't have capacity to do it. We've had conversations with the Harvard Disability Project around this and others. I did see within the last couple of weeks an offer of funding that got circulated around, I think it was at the federal level, for folks to be able to pay for setting up the exact kind of programs that you're talking about, Diane. We did not apply for it because, again, we just do not have the capacity to do that. But it's heartening to think that there's money out there at the federal level that can be applied for to you know, set up a more robust system for guardians.
You know, it's such a difficult issue because it's so personal. And I've been in situations where I've heard about, well, obviously with Diane too, it was like a real nuanced situation where perhaps state officials that were on the ground, it was advantageous to them, you know, to keep things as they were. So that complicates things sometimes, right? When you have that kind of thing. Other times I've heard from families who have felt unjustly pushed out of the way, so that because they were being too zealous, you know, as advocates. And, you know, you feel bad in those specific situations because you don't have the ability or the time, right, to process all of that. And on the state side, unfortunately, at DDS, they probably don't have enough attorneys and stuff to sort through it. But I can say I've been through a couple of situations, and Diane's included, where I felt like there was some, I guess, leveraging, you know, of the situation that was not in the best interest of family members, you know, or you know, and Diane was on the right track. So, so it's hard. It's hard when you see those kinds of individual things happen and you want to make a change. And I know that's why DLC is passionate about focusing on the systemic fixes, right? Because if we can fix it systemically, then fewer of those kinds of behaviors will happen. You know, that brings me to Dahab. I want to touch on with rehabilitation. And I'm wondering if, you know, in fact, I'm looking at the situation, not only what we have now, but what we had for a number of years with its underfunding, right? Given the population it serves. And then maybe there's a role beyond also, in fact, Rick and I are going to talk this week on the phone, what Disability Law Center can play in terms of that. And the second, you know, because it's clear to me that if I'm over Mass Health, I would want to worry about how good a job we're doing with the constituents that are in that program, or how good a job we're not doing. And so I do think, it's great to have you guys on this. And we had a number of meetings some months ago, but it's not just because of COVID. COVID's had a huge impact, but historically the way that service has been treated versus other services. And as much as we want DDS to advance and do better, when you compare rehabilitation to community-based day supports, it's not close, in terms of the support given and the focus, that DDS gives to that service. And that was partly through the closing shelter workshops. And at first it was really hard to get to the place where it was adequately funded. But then suddenly over a number of years, wow, we're actually getting people out and seeing people get real jobs and seeing people get into work situation where they're getting paid equitably. There's still work to be done, don't get me wrong, but it's a huge difference, post that transformation. So, and I think on some level, rehabilitation's got to have that kind of reckoning. And we should probably have the trade organization involved too, because 20 sites have closed in rehabilitation since COVID. And agencies are now saying even the reimbursement they get now is still problematic. And if they're to serve people that are more complex and need one-to-one, there's two issues that appear to be, hopefully one of them will be resolved. Hopefully ADDP is working on the one-on-one, because Mass Health is now responsible for doing the one-on-one allocation of funding for people in rehabilitation. And so hopefully that's going to get resolved with the trade. We'll see. But they're, given history with the PCA program, right, and how hours are approved or not approved, those are the kinds of things I worry about with rehabilitation when they're approving one-to-one, given the history of what would happen with the PCA program. So I don't know. Yeah.
I've found that I'm going to answer you in general terms because I think this hasn't been solved yet, right? And so I'm hesitant to come up with concrete because I still think we're trying to figure this out. But generally speaking, when I served in the House and in the Senate, because a lot of my work was focused on everyone that I thought needed, deserved, and wanted community-based supports. So that was seniors, as well as folks with disabilities. When I chaired the Elder Affairs Committee, Senator Pat Jalen and I met with the then Medicaid chair in Massachusetts, who after that was vaulted up to the federal level to serve for President Biden, Dan Tsai. And we met with him to really try to, and I think it's a constant struggle with Medicaid. They're about counting numbers and holding the bottom line because it's such a large piece of our state budget, and that's true in every state. We really were endeavoring to try to have him understand the voices, the people, the need behind those numbers. And I think we constantly have to do that to remind Medicaid that they're more than an organization that, has to pay attention to dollars and cents, that they are the backstop for many, many people. They are the difference between people having some modicum of quality of life and independence and not. And so regardless of who's at the helm at Medicaid, I think there's always going to be a struggle around rate setting, around what's appropriate. And so I think that we just always have to be willing to engage in that and to remind them what those numbers represent, that those are people. There's going to be a massive shift in the next couple of months, right? As the pandemic emergency goes away, and they're going to recertify Mass Health recipients. A large number of people are going to come off Mass Health. So there are real seismic changes in the offing in the next couple of months. So I do think it's incumbent on us, Leo, and others to really engage in honest dialogue about what those numbers represent. And when I was in the Senate, because a lot, although not all of my focus was autism, there were some of the providers that really take some of the toughest, most challenging, needs. And back then, and that was pre-COVID, they were recognizing that where they were at and where they were destined to go, it was just going to be more and more difficult to be able to service folks and care for them adequately and properly. So I don't know that issue is ever going to go away. So it really becomes incumbent on us to advocate, right? With the backstop of what's federal law, what's required by law, whether or not we are adhering to,
Right.
the law. And that's where sort of, you and I being non-lawyers, but you having 30 plus years of experience in this, and, me working, my advocacy end of it, combined with your knowledge and expertise, Hillary's and Rick's and others. That's why we all have to kind of band together on this.
Yes. So when we work together, we're far more effective.
Right.
And there's so much, and you just reminded people, we've been talking about the redeterminations, and it's good to remind people about the context of all this, that it's not a typical time. I don't know if there ever is a typical time for those that are on the call today, but it's especially so, and I don't know, I see Brianna here from Stavros. I don't know what you're facing out there, because you have a rural area in addition to cities, but in relation to what Barbara's sharing, and if people are getting kicked off or not, right? So we worry about, and Jim Crudner used to talk about food security, the previous CEO, and he made me aware of that. Like I took that for granted for so long, even that issue. Yeah, it's amazing to me. Barbara, we have a lot of bills this year. What a surprise. Okay. So to your point on bills, so good point, SDM will hopefully go over the transom this round. Okay. Unless we really blow it, it should, I shouldn't say it like that. Right. But it's maybe if I always say, maybe if a couple of people had still been in the building, or if Paul Tucker hadn't run for DA, who knows what could have happened with that bill at the end of the session. Right. We have 4 bills that are related to the broader community, and 4 that are on our platform. There's probably more than 4 bills. Okay. So there's the 2 transportation bills, there's the accessibility bill for building, that the not just independent living movement, but our colleagues cross disability movement is forwarding, and that they're this time they're on our slate on day one. And actually we were involved in helping work up the transportation ones, which has to do with human services transportation. Obviously, we could probably use a generic transportation bill, right, to get the rural systems and city systems doing better. And then on top of that, beyond SDM and those bills, we have a PCA bill for queuing and prompting, right, that's been sitting there for a while. We have a bill on, and I'm just going to mention a few, but there's literally 2.5 pages of bills we have. But the other one, a new one that relates, we think, to the workforce crisis, besides the workforce bill that ADDP joined us on, and that's for families who are even guardians and other responsible parties to be able to get paid for doing PCA or AFC. And Senator, that was a big thing for Senator Lovely, your old colleague and friend. So I think I'm pretty sure, so she's doing it in the Senate. I'm going to space out on who's doing it in the House. This is embarrassing, but I will look it up while you respond to that. So it's a lot, right, going on.
Right. Yeah, we are definitely a part of that continuous skilled nursing push, which part of that includes, as you just mentioned, folks with hours that have been approved by Medicaid, but they are never able to get enough nursing to fill said hours. Parents take over the nursing duties at a bare minimum. They ought to be reimbursed for that. One of our members of our staff is in that situation, and so at times is unable to work because the nurse hasn't shown up and needs to tend to her son. So it's very personal in our agency.
Yeah, that one, that's yet another bill. That one's Cindy Friedman and Denise Garlick, I think. And then the one I spaced out on for the guardians to be paid, and I mean, we should have added continuous nursing to this, is Jim O'Day's in the House side that I mentioned. That I was,
and the PCA queuing and supervision's been around for over a decade, because I can remember supporting that. I might have even filed that when I was in the Senate, and I was the chair of Elder Affairs, for a period of time.
Short of a decade, but you filed it for sure. You were the
Yeah,
sponsor.
yeah. But I mean, that's been around for a really, really long time. And again, I don't think it's a super controversial bill, in my opinion, just like supported decision making, I think of supported decision making as another tool in the toolbox. And that's what I was telling the legislators that I ran into, in the brief period of time we had from October to the end of last session. Yeah, and
it's more the volume, don't you think? I guess what I'm sharing with you, like queuing and prompting, that's going to be a cost thing, but they can handle that with us by saying, okay, well, we want it structured, how it happens in the regulations, right? They can put language in the bill, it's a compromise. But we have to help them understand that, right? Because otherwise it's not going to move, because they're going to say it's going to be so expensive. Whereas SDM, I think you're right, it's another alternative. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. But okay, so I'm going to push back a little on the
Go ahead,
PCA
go
bill.
ahead.
So it's easy to say something is going to cost too much money in a vacuum, but what you have to do is look at what are the costs when you fail to make this change. So this was kind of what we were up against with autism mandated medical insurance, right? Oh, it's going to cost so much money. Oh, people are going to come out of the woodwork. Well, what is the cost? The cost is there. Who's it being pushed on? Who's shouldering it? And I would argue allowing someone to have a PCA for queuing and supervision really helps a lot of people who are dealing with dementia and other issues as well. Certainly folks with intellectual disabilities that are able to do, but aren't able to hold that in their mind, not able to put it into a routine. And so failure to recognize the cost of doing nothing is where we need to have the conversation. Because in the case of folks who need queuing and supervision, but are capable of doing this, if they're not able to receive those services, where do they go? Where do they land? What happens to them? That's where the conversation needs to go with this. So people understand that yes, there's a cost, but it's an investment, because otherwise that cost is being borne out somewhere else. So that's the way I think we have to frame these kinds of conversations. And by the way, looking at Brianna, because I'm part of the Dignity Alliance, and they are having a bill co-sponsorship event on Thursday from 11 to 12:30 in room 428 in the State House. And former Senator Dick Moore, former Elder Affairs Secretary and North Shore Elder Services Chair Paul Enzikos really started up that group. And they are focused on sort of, nursing home issues in particular, but a broader disability agenda as well. And they are opening up their bill signing to any disability organization that would like to participate and bring their bills into the old Senate mailroom. It's a beautiful, room in room 428. And also, Brianna's dealing with 4 nursing homes that are going to close in Springfield. There will not be, save for one, I think, a nursing home still open in Springfield. So
yeah, I think there's 2 others, but one is Loomis, and it's got a really high star rating, on Medicare's website. So it's a 4 or 5 star rating. I think it's 5-star, but only 42 beds. And so that is nearly impossible to get into, and according to the ombudsman. And also there's another nursing home that is 16 acres that's been cited for abuse and is 1 star. So
Wow. Wow.
So the risk is, getting displaced to either far away from family or friends and networks, or being in a lower quality nursing home. So there's a lot to work on.
And
yeah, and I'm assuming, there's a lot to work on in terms of people being aware about the in-home supports they could get, and then getting the staffing, to
right.
complement that. So it's another argument to pay even responsible family, if someone's a guardian, and you can have a check and balance with that. obviously.
And there is a lawsuit right now that the Committee for Public,
CPCS.
CPR,
Oh.
Committee for Public Representation is filed to try to remove folks under Olmsted, to remove folks from nursing homes that want to live in the community. So the parallels are there. They are so strong, right? And so that's why I think whenever possible, when our community here can work with the elder community, because they want the same thing. They want good community supports. They want caregiving to be recognized and valued and supported, and they want people to be able to live to their fullest extent, possible. So that's why it's interesting that I kind of turned from being a social worker in the elder world, right, doing community-based, to then having my son with autism, and then trying to marry up the two and work on behalf of both when I was in the legislature. So, yeah. And so Leo, technically, the ARC could come on Thursday and bring those bills and have a chance to get co-sponsors. I know you are pushing for co-sponsorship right now through your notes from the ARC and your ability to reach down to individuals and ask them to share their compelling stories with their individual legislators to get them to co-sponsor bills. But you could join that as well if you
I
were
mean, the only
interested.
reason we're not active in that, it's capacity, honestly.
Right.
Yeah, it's really a capacity issue for us, and just trying to keep our foot on the pedal. But we do, anytime there's something in common that's going on, that's actually, going into the building or whatever, or supporting an issue. That's why we add on bills to the platform. As it makes sense. I just want to say, Brianna put in a couple of links, one to that event for Thursday, but as well as thank you, Brianna, for getting up there the docket number on that other bill, and an article about the Simmons case. So that's the third lawsuit that CPR. We were involved with two of them, in terms of nursing homes, and this is the newest one. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And there is that juxtaposition of funding, and they are connected, they are linked. Anybody have one last, I'm looking at the time, the 45 minutes are over, and I don't want to hang people in here, but we can go a little longer. But anybody have a question, another question or statement they want to make before we end the session?
Can anyone go to the bill signing event? I mean, the co-sponsor event?
Yes.
Yeah,
An
of course.
organization?
Of course.
Yes. Jossie, I will forward it to Leo, and then Leo can send it on out.
Yeah.
But it's part of a group called Dignity Alliance, and Boston Center for Independent Living is part of it. Stavros is part of it. CPR is a part of it. We're a part of it. Like it's a group that's just really trying to, pull together and work on some of these issues.
Yeah,
But
I mean, it's right there in the chat too, if people want to.
Yeah, I copied and pasted. I'm going to share with the MDDC and see if they're
Great.
interested.
Wonderful. Yeah, because a lot of our work, we're doing the investigation of, we go into nursing homes, we go into jails, as well as Bridgewater State Hospital, all the state hospitals, and we go into, day programs and residential. So it's of interest to us because we are trying to always look for a least restrictive setting for folks.
Leo, I just want to say how valuable an organization that the Disability Law Center is. Another organization, Health Law Advocates, for folks who are out there trying to figure it out and don't know where to turn. These are great organizations to help guide you through issues. We've used both DLC as well as Health Law Advocates in situations that we've had with Joe. So it just can't encourage folks enough to utilize those services because they're really, really valuable.
Great.
And
Thank
we're
you.
willing to come out and speak to different groups. We're always willing to do outreach. So if there are opportunities to come out and address a given group that you might be a part of, more than happy to do that. But I would say, when in doubt, reach out to us through the website, through the intake. And if it's something that we can do to help, we will. And if it's not, we will refer out to the appropriate agencies. And again, just about the DAHAB, that we have this active DAHAB survey up because we are seeking individual, responses back from folks who have, not been able to get back to DAHAB and or had their hours severely reduced.
Okay, all right. Thank you, and looking forward to working with you, Barbara, continuing our work together. And everybody, thank you for attending. Have a great day. Happy February, Valentine's Day tomorrow. So I hope you
Right.
all have a great one. All right. Take
Thank
care.
you. It's my
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.